And welcome back to the show. You're listening to centralcoastradio.com. Now, there is a very, very interesting documentary that has come out over the last week. It is called Living With Chucky, and it is an absolute ode to all things Chucky, and I think you are going to love this film. And we thought, hey, let's get to know the people behind this film a little bit better, and we've actually got the director on the phone right now to talk a little bit about this amazing documentary. Welcome to the show, Kyra.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Now tell us a little bit about this documentary. Where did your love affair with Chucky start, and what made you decide to do this film?
I believe it was a hate-love at first that eventually grew into love. My dad, Tony Gardner, is a special effects makeup artist, but also makes the Chucky dolls for the movies ever since Seed of Chucky. And I was around 4 when he came on to that franchise. So I eventually went into filmmaking and went to film school. And one semester we had a class on documentary filmmaking. And I decided to do a short film on what it was like growing up with Chucky to an extent called The Dollhouse. And since I graduated, I expanded that into a feature film that also is like a retrospective.
So as a 4-year-old, how aware were you of what your dad was doing? Because one of my really good friends' dads worked as a props master on a lot of Ozploitation films, so he grew up with a lot of pretty ghastly things around the house when he was growing up. So how aware were you of what your dad was doing, and when did you first start watching the Chucky films yourself?
I probably have blocked some things out of my memory from trauma. I won't lie. So I don't have a total recollection of it, but I remember being scared of the doll at first. And then it wasn't until I was around like 8 or 9, I snuck a Seed of Chucky DVD to a friend's birthday party. And that was my first experience actually watching the films. Obviously, that was also traumatic in itself because my dad dies in that movie and nobody decided to tell me that. So it wasn't really until high school when, it transferred over to Curse of Chucky that I started to have an appreciation from the filmmaking side. And I was less creeped out by Chucky at that point, but there was a big transition period.
Yeah, you mentioned that you snuck it into a birthday party. My wife famously tells the story on air about how she snuck in a copy of Nightmare of Elm Street into a slumber party when she was at primary school, and none of those kids spoke to her after that. How did that go down with you at the party with that film?
My God. Well, Nightmare on Elm Street is incredibly terrifying in its own regard. I'm so sorry for your wife. But luckily, Seed is more of like the goofy meta version, but honestly, we didn't even get very far because as soon as my dad died, I was bawling my eyes out and calling my parents to pick me up to go home. So really, it was just I traumatized myself there.
Yeah. As a filmmaker now, though, looking back at those films and the work that your dad did, does it change how you look at those films now and your dad's work now that you're a filmmaker yourself?
Oh my God, yeah. I already had an appreciation and love for what my dad does, but as especially being a director and wanting to direct what he does, you have to know how those things work in order to direct it well, in my opinion. And I just did a music video the other day, and we're using some old 80s techniques from Evil Dead and The Blob, and my dad did The Blob, and he sat me down and went scene by scene on how they did some of the gags from that movie, and I was just sitting there in awe of how cool my dad is and how amazing his world is.
Yeah. Now, you touched a little bit about where the idea for this documentary first came from. Tell us a little bit about that journey. Where did it go from there to what we see now on screen?
Yeah, when I was in film school, I originally was thinking about just doing it on my dad as an SFX artist, but a teacher pointed out that I referred to Chucky as a little brother, which was really weird. And Chucky was a deeper subset of my dad's career that had existed my entire life, so it made more sense to focus on that. And then when the film was done, and it just included, I think, Brad, Fiona, Dawn, and David Kirshner, the producer. Those were and of course my dad and myself. And when it played, coincidentally, Cult of Chucky was coming out that same year. So it played ahead of all Cult of Chucky's premieres. And I saw the fans' response to seeing like a personal element and aspect of the Chucky movies. And I had so much footage already, I just figured I'd probably could start editing it and then expand on it and get more interviews as time went on, because I still had to finish school and things like that, and that's exactly what happened.
What was that like, organizing all of those interviews and finding people that are so involved with the Chucky universe? Was that a difficult process, or was that quite an easy process for you as a filmmaker?
Luckily, because, my dad's involved with the movies and now the TV show, it was really kind of just going through my dad or asking Dawn or David if they could reach out to people for me. Luckily, the family's so tight, Kyra Elise and Alex Vincent, I think I just messaged them on social media, which was really easy. And what was nice, too, is that because the short was already done, it was like I could show a proof of concept of where I was headed. Whereas, I think it would have been harder for people to understand otherwise. And then, nothing too crazy to arrange within the Chucky family itself. There were definitely a few other interviews I wanted to get, but just didn't have the connections or never got a response, or some people said no.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, because a few years ago, there's a Ozploitation film that came out here a few years ago that I absolutely loved, and I had the opportunity to interview one of the actresses from that film at a convention and she's gone off to the US now and become like a fairly big star. And I went to ask her about this film, and she was like, I don't want to talk about that film. I'm kind of embarrassed that it's on my resume. Did you find anybody like that? Was there anyone like that in the Chucky universe?
A friend I ended up meeting through the film festival circuit was friends with Tom Holland, and he connected us in email. And Tom, it was kind of the same situation. Not that Tom was embarrassed at all, but Tom was like, well, I only directed the first movie. I don't know what you'd want from me. And I'm like, I want you because you directed the first movie. What are you talking about? So it's interesting, exactly how you described it. It's really interesting to see how people view themselves or their work, and it has nothing to do with you, but it's their perception of things. And I know there was a big, not beef or anything, but just when Child's Play went from the first to the second and John LaFia took over, there's a bit of muddled history there. But obviously John LaFia passed away, so I couldn't reach out to him to interview. So Tom said no, though. I was shocked by that one.
Now, talking of conventions and things like that, I know there is a lot of buzz around your film now. A lot of people that I know in the horror circles have been talking about the film and saying how they can't wait to see it. Did that buzz kind of surprise you at the time, or how have you felt hearing about that?
It's really shocking to hear people want to go see my movie, considering it was also because of the legalities and things that I was jumping through. I honestly didn't think that this movie was going to find a home or be able to be seen by the public. So the fact that people are excited, and I have people asking me if I'm going to Monsterpalooza and things like that here in the US is really cool. And although I'm not a part of the Chucky franchise in a sense, the fact that this movie is adjacent to it and people are looking forward to seeing it and some people love it is really cool.
Were you aware of that fandom around the Chucky universe before you started on the film, or was that something you kind of learnt about during the making of the film?
I'm a horror fan myself, and I've been to conventions and things like that, but obviously I've gone as a fan of whatever movies I'm a fan of or just the genre, and it honestly wasn't until my film festival circuit that I now understand like the fans of Chucky, because I was now like on the receiving end as somebody who had made something in the Child's Play universe. So people coming up to me and asking me to sign something, or this one girl gave me a Chucky Funko keychain as a gift, and I was like, oh, this is what it's like for the actual Chucky family to receive the love of this franchise, and that's so cool to get to experience a fraction of it.
Given that you've worked on Living with Chucky and Studio 666, I'm pretty sure you're going to get invited to a lot more of those conventions. Are you ready for that?
No, that doesn't seem real. I'm happy to. You know, I told my dad has never done, like, he's never had a table at a convention. I'm trying to convince him to do Son of Monsterpalooza this fall. So maybe this will be the impetus, because I'll be there with him, and maybe more people will come.
Definitely. Well, Studio 666, when that came out here in Australia, I remember all these fuddy-duddy old critics were like, oh, I didn't like it at all, but all the young critics who are into horror were like, are you kidding? That was absolutely fantastic. So that is definitely going to be it's got a real cult following here in Australia, and I'm sure it's going to be shown at film festivals for a lot of years to come. So yeah, get ready for that.
I love that. I love that. That makes me happy, because it's, yeah, the older fuddy-duddy people, they just don't understand, man.
Yeah. Now, I know we are running out of time very, very quickly, so to wrap up, what would you like to say to everybody out there who is about to sit down and watch Living with Chucky for the very first time?
Well, no pressure here. If you're a new Chucky fan or have only seen one or two of the movies, hopefully you learn something new, or maybe makes you want to watch all the rest of them. Or if you're an older fan, it also makes you want to go back and rewatch the franchise with a different and new perspective that you didn't have before going into seeing this film, Living with Chucky. And if you're an older horror fan, I know you'll probably know some of the things in the retrospect, but hopefully you learn something new too. And also, when we hit the personal aspect, I hope it makes you have a deeper appreciation for just how hard all these people have worked for over 30 years to bring you this horror icon at home.
Well, Kyra, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today on our show. It's been an absolute privilege having you on the show, and we can't wait to see what your next project is going to be as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.